Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is accusing Russia of trying to humiliate the United Nations. This after Moscow apparently fired missiles on Kyiv while UN Chief Antonio Gutteres visited the city. The deadly attack ended weeks of relative calm in the capital city. Let's get the latest from our correspondent William Denselow. Will, let's talk about exactly what happened. We saw Antonio Gutteres, the UN chief, go to Russia first, meet with the foreign minister there as well as Putin. He then went to Kyiv to meet with Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and then those attacks apparently happening. What's the reaction?
Well, there's been a very strong reaction, as you might imagine, Shahan, from representatives in Kyiv. We've heard from the Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba, who's described this attack as a heinous act of barbarism. He said that this showed how Russia perceives Ukraine, Europe and the rest of the world. That was very much a point reiterated by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, as you mentioned. He said that this very much showed Russia's true colours. He said, as you said, that this was an act to humiliate the United Nations and other organisations like it. The message from Volodymyr Zelenskyy is that it required a strong response in retaliation.
Yeah, so let's talk about that Russia and what they're saying about this. And afterwards, I actually want to talk about that meeting with Russian officials, with Guterres. But first, what's Russia saying to this?
Well, very little in terms of a direct reaction. However, the Ministry of Defence in Russia has released some images that purportedly show a Russian submarine in the Black Sea firing cruise missiles. It's reported but not confirmed that it was those missiles that struck this space and missile centre in the Kyiv region. It's also believed that an apartment building was struck, killing a Ukrainian journalist as well. The Ministry of Defence in Russia saying that essentially they destroyed this facility with a long-range missile. But as to why these attacks took place and the timing of them, of course, considering the fact that Antonio Gutteres was in Kyiv just a couple of days after he was meeting with Russian President Putin, well, the Ministry of Defence didn't elaborate on that.
Yeah, it is somewhat quite worrying because many would argue that the UN chief went to Russia and Ukraine to try to find some sort of resolution to this war, which has been carrying on for months, but it doesn't seem to have made any impact.
Jean, that's absolutely right. Of course, Antonio Gutteres earlier on in the week on Tuesday said he was arriving in Moscow as a messenger for peace. He, of course, met with Sergei Lavrov, the country's foreign minister, as well as Russia's President Vladimir Putin. Now, in those meetings, he firmly expressed that he did not subscribe to the Russian view of what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. He said that this was, in the minds of the United Nations, not a special military operation. This was an invasion and in violation of the UN Charter. Of course, this is something that the Secretary-General has repeated for the last few months at UN headquarters in New York. Now, of course, the hope is, at least in the short term, that what the United Nations Secretary-General wanted to achieve was to try and establish some lines of communication to guarantee humanitarian corridors coming out of especially those besieged parts of Mariupol. Now, after that meeting with Vladimir Putin, the UN Secretary-General in a statement said that the Russian president had agreed in principle to allowing those humanitarian corridors. That was then walked back by Dmitry Peskov. The Kremlin spokesperson said that nothing concrete had been agreed. Secretary-General Guterres saying this week that intense negotiations have been ongoing to try and get these humanitarian corridors open. And of course, today here in the region, the message from Ukrainian officials is they were trying to embark on a special operation to try and get those civilians trapped in Mariupol evacuated.
Yeah, and then lastly, Baltic leaders and the Polish foreign minister met today. What's coming out of that?
Absolutely. Well, a very strong message here in Latvia. The meeting was held here in Riga, and Latvia's foreign minister essentially said that he wanted a permanent deployment of troops on the eastern flank for the NATO region. He said that that would help protect the Baltic as well as the likes of Poland from any kind of aggression as far as Russia or Belarus is concerned. He said that that would be an effort to protect every inch of its territory. There are a number of other things that he discussed that was agreed on by the Baltic foreign ministers as well as Poland's foreign ministers. They agree they wanted to see a ramp up when it comes to military hardware as well as weapons sent to Ukraine. They want to see Russian sanctions strengthened as well, especially when it comes to the energy sector. When it comes to energy, of course, this comes in a week that both Bulgaria and Poland have seen their energy supplies or their gas supplies cut off from Russia. The message from the foreign ministers here in Latvia is that they want to see these nations become independent of Russian energy as soon as possible.
All right, thanks for that. Appreciate it. Our correspondent William Denselow live to us from Riga in Latvia.